The Grand Hall of Varexis Prime was filled with diplomats, military leaders, and high-ranking officials from across the galaxy. The room was a marvel of engineering, its towering glass walls revealing the endless stretch of space beyond. Soft blue lights illuminated the chamber, casting a glow over the gathered delegates. Captain Elias Voss adjusted the collar of his formal uniform and exhaled slowly. Even after years of war, this was one of the hardest moments of his life. The peace summit between humanity and the Xilari Empire was meant to end years of bloodshed, but tension still hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The Xilari had been humanity's greatest enemy, a race of tall, silver-skinned beings with glowing violet eyes. Ruthless, disciplined, and technologically advanced, they had almost crushed humanity in the war. But after heavy losses on both sides, they finally agreed to negotiate. Elias, a decorated war hero, had been chosen to represent Earth's interests. It was an honor, but also a painful reminder of everything he had lost. Then, as he turned toward the entrance, his heart stopped. A figure stepped into the hall, moving with quiet grace. She was Xilari, but unlike the others, she was familiar. Too familiar. Silver skin, tall and elegant, her deep violet eyes scanning the room. A long cloak concealed most of her body, but Elias knew her face instantly. Zira. It was impossible. She had died. Elias felt the air leave his lungs as memories of fire, blood, and destruction rushed back. Verosnine, the brutal battle where he had seen her ship explode in the sky. He had grieved for her, and yet she was here, alive. Before he could move, she locked eyes with him and whispered in a voice only he could hear, "I sacrificed everything to be with you again, human." The words sent a shockwave through him. His fingers clenched into fists as 100 questions stormed his mind. How was she alive? Why was she here? And what did she mean by sacrificed everything? But there was no time to react. A Xilari official stepped forward, his deep voice breaking the silence. Let the negotiations begin. Elias forced himself to breathe. This was not the time for personal feelings. This was diplomacy, history in the making. He had to stay focused. But as the meeting started, his mind refused to obey. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Hours later, the summit had ended for the day, and Elias finally had a moment to himself. But his thoughts were in chaos. He needed answers. His hands tightened around the metal railing of the observation deck as he stared out into the void of space. She was alive. The woman he had fought beside. The woman he had cared for. Soft footsteps approached behind him. He turned. Zira stood there, her cloak wrapped tightly around her form. There was something different about her, something fragile. The proud warrior he once knew now seemed haunted. "You should be dead," Elias said, his voice harsher than he intended. Zira lowered her gaze. "I was supposed to be." Silence stretched between them. The distant hum of the station's engines filled the empty space. "Then how?" he asked, searching her face for answers. "How are you standing here?" Zira hesitated before speaking. "I betrayed my people to survive." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. Betrayal. In Xilari culture, that was worse than death. "They think I am dead," she continued, her voice quieter now. "I let them believe it. I left behind everything. My home, my rank, my family. All for a chance to find you again." His chest tightened. This was insane. Why would she risk everything just to see him? "Why?" he finally asked. "Why would you do this?" Her violet eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something raw and painful behind them. "Because," she whispered, "you were the only one who ever saw me as more than a soldier, more than an enemy. You saw me." Elias felt something inside him shift. The war had made monsters of them all. It had forced them to kill, to hate, to destroy. But before Verosnine, before everything fell apart, he had seen glimpses of something more between them. a connection neither of them had dared to name. And now she was here. But if her people found out she was alive, if humanity discovered what she had done, this was dangerous. For both of them. "We shouldn't be talking," Elias said, forcing himself to look away. "If they find out." "They won't," Zyra interrupted. "I know the risks. I knew them the moment I left everything behind for you." His heart pounded. This wasn't just a reunion. This was a ticking bomb. And Elias wasn't sure if he had the strength to walk away. Elias stared at Zyra, his mind spinning. She had betrayed her people, given up everything. For him. He didn't know what to feel. Anger, guilt, confusion. She was supposed to be dead, lost in the flames of war. And yet here she was, standing before him, alive but forever hunted. "We can't be seen together," he muttered, scanning the empty corridor. Zyra's gaze didn't waver. "Then we talk where no one can see." Elias clenched his jaw. He knew this was dangerous. If either side discovered their history, their connection, it could destroy everything. The peace talks, his career, even her life. And yet, he couldn't ignore her. Not after everything. "Follow me," he whispered. They moved through the station's dimly lit corridors, avoiding security patrols until they reached an abandoned storage bay. The doors hissed shut behind them, sealing them in. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elias exhaled sharply. "Start talking." Zyra pulled back her hood, revealing her tired, worn face. The confident warrior he once knew was still there, but something was different. Shadows under her eyes, the way her shoulders tensed. She had suffered. "When Veros mine fell, I should have died," she said softly. "My ship was hit, but I survived the explosion. Barely. The escape pod was damaged. No communication, no signal. My people assumed I was lost." Elias swallowed. He remembered that battle. The chaos, the destruction. He had fought so hard to protect his soldiers. He had seen her ship go down and fought. "You could have returned," he said. "Sent a signal. Let them know you were alive." Zyra shook her head. "I tried. But by the time I reached a auxiliary outpost, things had changed. The war had become darker. My people had stopped fighting for honor. It was only about destruction, about making humanity suffer." She paused. "And I couldn't be part of it anymore." Elias frowned. "So, what? You just ran." Zyra's expression hardened. "I made a choice." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I told them I was unfit to fight. A coward. I let them strip me of my rank, my name, everything." Elias stared at her in disbelief. Among the auxiliary, honor was everything. To be labeled a coward, to willingly accept disgrace, it was unthinkable. "You let them believe you were weak," he said. "It was the only way they would let me go." Elias exhaled, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "And all of this," he motioned to her. "You came all this way. For what? What do you want from me, Zyra?" She hesitated. "I needed to see you." His chest tightened. "Why?" he asked again. Zyra's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because you are the only one who ever saw me as more than a weapon." Elias felt something stir deep inside him. Memories flooded back. Secret conversations between battles. The way she had questioned the war. The way she had saved him when she didn't have to. For a long time, he had ignored what it meant, pushed it aside because it was impossible. But now, there was no avoiding it. "You should have stayed away," Elias muttered. "This is dangerous, Zyra. If either side finds out about us." "Then let them find out," she interrupted. "I don't care anymore." Elias gritted his teeth. "Well, I do." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Zyra sighed, looking down. "I know this is difficult. I know I shouldn't have come. But I had to, Elias. Because A sudden noise outside made them freeze. Footsteps, voices. Someone was coming. Elias acted on instinct, grabbing Zyra's arm and pulling her into the shadows. They pressed against the wall, barely breathing. Through the crack of the door, Elias saw two Xilari guards passing by, their voices sharp. "Are you certain?" one said. "A traitor here. Humans cannot be trusted," the other muttered. "If she's alive, we will find her." Elias felt Zyra tense beside him. The guards lingered for a moment, then moved on. Only when their footsteps faded did Elias let out a slow breath. Zyra looked up at him. "They know." Elias nodded grimly. "And they won't stop until they find you." For the first time since their reunion, fear flickered in her violet eyes. "What do we do?" she whispered. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon. His instincts told him to push her away, to keep his distance, to stay safe. But another part of him, the part that had missed her for years, the part that had never stopped thinking about her, refused to let her go. "We run," he said. Zyra's eyes widened. "You would do that?" Elias exhaled. "I don't know what's right anymore, Zyra. But I do know this. If they want to take you, they'll have to go through me first." For the first time that night, a small, sad smile touched Zyra's lips. "Then we run." And with that, they disappeared into the darkness. Elias and Zyra moved quickly through the dimly lit corridors of the station, their footsteps barely making a sound. The tension between them was thick, but there was no time to talk, no time to think. The Xilari guards were searching for Zyra. If they found her, there would be no trial, no negotiation, only execution. And if humanity's leaders discovered that Elias was protecting her, he would be branded a traitor. Yet here he was, risking everything. He didn't fully understand why. Maybe he didn't want to. They reached a maintenance hatch at the far end of the station. Elias tapped a few commands into his wrist device, disabling the security sensors. The hatch slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a narrow passage leading to the lower decks. Zyra hesitated. "Where does this go?" "Docking bay," Elias whispered. "We find a ship and get out of here." She gave him a sharp look. "And then what?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't have a plan beyond escaping. His life had been defined by orders, strategies, missions, but this was chaos. This was personal. For the first time in years, he was acting purely on instinct. "Let's go," he said, stepping inside. They moved through the tight passage, the faint hum of the station's power core vibrating beneath their feet. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant echoes of security patrols above. Finally, Zyra spoke. "You don't have to do this, Elias." He glanced at her. "I already have." Zyra sighed. "You're throwing away everything. Your rank, your future." "Maybe my future was never mine to begin with," he interrupted. His voice was quieter now, more thoughtful. "Maybe it was always controlled by war, by duty, by everyone but me." Zyra studied him carefully. She had seen this in him before, back when they were enemies forced to share the same battlefield. He was a soldier, yes, a warrior, but he was also something more, someone who questioned the fight even when others blindly followed it. That was why she had fallen for him, even when she hadn't meant to. "Elias," she said softly, "this is madness." He smirked. "That's what they always said about humans, right?" For the first time in years, she almost laughed. A dangerous gamble. They reached the lower levels without being detected. The docking bay was in sight, but a problem stood in their way. Security checkpoints. Armed guards were stationed at every entrance, scanning every ship that came in or out. If they tried to walk through, they would be caught instantly. Zyra frowned. "Too many guards. We won't make it." Elias scanned the area. Then his eyes landed on a nearby cargo platform. Large supply crates were being loaded onto a freighter. He could see a technician logging inventory. That was their way in. "We hide in one of those crates," Elias said. "They'll load us onto the ship, and once we're off station, we take control." Zira raised an eyebrow. And if they scan the cargo? Then we improvise. She gave him a skeptical look. I hate human plans. Then you'll love this next part, Elias said, already moving. They slipped into the shadows, weaving between storage containers. Elias kept an eye on the guards while Zira hacked into a nearby terminal, altering the cargo logs to include 2 extra crates. Within minutes, they were inside one of the metal storage units, crouched together in the cramped space as the loading process began. The crate shook as a robotic arm lifted it, carrying them toward the ship. Elias felt Zira tense beside him. He could tell she hated this, hated feeling trapped, hated relying on luck. Scifi warriors were trained for precision, for control. But right now, there was no control, only trust. Trust in him. The cost of survival. For a while, everything went smoothly. Then the alarms blared. Unauthorized passenger detected. A cold mechanical voice announced. Elias cursed under his breath. They had been scanned. The crate was dropped roughly onto the docking platform as heavy footsteps rushed toward them. The lock hissed, and the lid was pulled open. 3 security officers stood outside, weapons raised. Elias moved first. Fast. He grabbed the nearest guard's wrist, twisting the weapon out of his grip before slamming his elbow into the man's throat. The second guard raised his blaster, but Zira was already on him, her movements fluid and deadly. A single strike to his pressure point sent him crumbling to the ground. The third guard hesitated, but that was his mistake. Elias knocked the weapon from his hands and drove a fist into his stomach, sending him sprawling. The entire fight lasted less than 10 seconds. Elias grabbed one of the weapons and tossed another to Zira. We need to move. Now. They rushed onto the freighter, sealing the hatch behind them. Elias sprinted to the control panel, overriding the ship's systems. The engines roared to life. The stolen freighter shot through the vast darkness of space, its engines humming steadily. Inside the cockpit, Elias adjusted the ship's course, while Zira kept a close watch on the radar. Their escape had been successful, but the danger was far from over. They'll be looking for us, Zira muttered, her violet eyes fixed on the screen. Both sides. Elias sighed, leaning back in his seat. Yeah, I figured. There was a brief silence between them, filled only by the quiet beeping of the ship's controls. The weight of their situation pressed down on both of them. They were fugitives now, outlaws with no home, no allies. Elias exhaled slowly. That colony you mentioned, is it safe? Zira hesitated. It's not under human or auxiliary control. The people there, they don't care about politics. If we're careful, we can disappear. Elias nodded, adjusting the ship's trajectory. Then that's where we go. As the ship moved through the endless void, Zira finally allowed herself to relax. Just a little. She stole a glance at Elias. His face was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He had sacrificed everything for her, and now they were both running from the only lives they had ever known. She wanted to say something to ease the weight of what they had done. But before she could speak, the radar beeped loudly. Elias leaned forward, his expression darkening. We've got company. Hunted. Zira's hands moved quickly over the controls, her instincts kicking in. Who is it? Elias checked the readings. His heart sank. Scifi warships. 3 of them. Zira clenched her jaw. They found us faster than I thought. The comm system crackled to life, and a deep, cold voice filled the cockpit. Traitor Zira Vane, human Elias Carter. Power down your vessel and surrender immediately. Elias scoffed. Yeah, that's not happening. Zira didn't hesitate. We run. Elias gripped the controls as Zira rerouted power to the engines. The freighter surged forward, but the warships weren't far behind. They're gaining on us, Elias muttered. Zira's fingers danced over the controls. Not for long. She activated the ship's emergency thrusters, and the freighter jolted violently, speeding into a dense asteroid field. Elias swore under his breath. "Are you crazy?" Zira's expression was calm, focused. "Trust me." The ship weaved through the massive chunks of rock, dodging debris as the auxiliary warships followed. The asteroid field was dangerous, but Zira knew the auxiliary wouldn't give up easily. Elias took a deep breath. "All right, let's see what this old ship can do." A desperate gamble. The freighter twisted and turned between the floating asteroids, dodging incoming laser fire from the warships. Explosions lit up the darkness as the auxiliary tried to blast through the obstacles. Zira's hands moved swiftly, guiding the ship with precision. "We need to lose them in the debris." Elias quickly scanned the sensors. "There's a dense cluster ahead. If we can squeeze through, they won't follow." Zira nodded. "Then hold on." The ship shot forward, skimming dangerously close to the massive asteroids. The auxiliary warships hesitated, unable to match the freighter's maneuverability in such a tight space. Zira saw their hesitation and seized the opportunity. Now, Elias activated the ship's cloaking system just as they slipped through the asteroid cluster. For a few agonizing seconds, they held their breath. Then, silence. The auxiliary warships flew past, unable to detect them. Elias exhaled in relief. "We lost them." Zira finally relaxed her grip on the controls. For now. They both sat in silence, the weight of their escape settling in. Elias glanced at her. "You really are crazy, you know that." Zira smirked. "And you still followed me." Elias chuckled. "Yeah, guess that says something about me." A new beginning. Hours passed as the freighter moved farther from danger. The colony was still a few days away, but for the first time, they had a moment to breathe. Elias checked the ship's systems while Zira rested in the co-pilot's seat. He glanced at her, seeing the exhaustion in her face. She had given up everything. Her people, her honor, her entire past. For him. The thought made his chest tighten. "You should sleep," he said quietly. Zira opened her eyes slightly. "I'm fine." Elias smirked. "You always say that." Zira sighed, closing her eyes again. "Wake me if anything happens." Elias watched her for a moment before turning back to the controls. They had no idea what awaited them on the colony. No idea if they could truly be free. But one thing was certain. As long as they had each other, they weren't alone. The stolen freighter drifted through deep space, its engines running at low power to avoid detection. Inside the cockpit, Elias stared at the endless void ahead, his fingers tapping lightly against the console. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Zira sat beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the navigation data. "Another 12 hours until we reach the colony," she murmured. Elias nodded. "If we're lucky, no one's tracking us anymore." She didn't respond immediately. The Xilari don't give up easily. And the humans, they might not, either. Elias sighed, leaning back in his seat. "Yeah, I know." They had made their choice, to run, to leave everything behind. But the past didn't let go so easily. Enemies on both sides wanted them gone. Still, this colony was their best chance, a place beyond the reach of war, where no one cared who they had been. But was such a place even real? Unspoken truths. For a while, neither of them spoke. The soft hum of the ship was the only sound. Then Zira finally broke the silence. "Back on the station. Before we left, you said you threw everything away for us." Elias glanced at her. "Yeah." She hesitated. "Did you mean it?" He exhaled slowly. "If I didn't, I wouldn't be here." Zira looked away, her expression unreadable. "I never thought this would happen." Elias gave a small smile. "Falling for your enemy." She rolled her eyes. "Don't flatter yourself." But there was no venom in her voice, only quiet acceptance. "We should rest," Elias said finally. "We'll need to be alert when we land." Zira nodded, but neither of them moved. For now, The silence was enough. A false safe haven. 12 hours later, the colony came into view. A small planet, covered in thick forests and shimmering blue oceans, appeared on the screen. Elias adjusted the ship's course, bringing them toward the settlement's coordinates. Zira scanned the area. No warships in sight. That's a good sign. Elias grinned. Maybe we finally caught a break. The freighter entered the atmosphere, shaking slightly as it passed through the clouds. Below, a city made of stone and metal stretched across the land, a strange mix of old and new. They landed at a quiet docking port on the outskirts. The colony wasn't under auxiliary or human rule, but that didn't mean they were safe. We blend in, Zyra said. No trouble. Elias smirked. Since when do I cause trouble? She just gave him a look, and he chuckled. Fine, fine. No trouble. As they stepped off the ship, a warm breeze greeted them. The air smelled fresh, different from the sterile halls of space stations or the burned metal scent of battlefields. For the first time in a long time, it almost felt peaceful. But peace never lasted. Shadows from the past. The marketplace was alive with movement. Humans, aliens, traders, and mercenaries, all moving between stalls. Zira kept her hood up, blending into the crowd. Elias stayed close behind, his eyes scanning for threats. They found an old mechanic willing to take the freighter off their hands. In return, they received enough credits to survive for a while. We lay low, Zyra reminded him. No unnecessary attention. Elias nodded. Got it. But fate had other plans. As they turned into a quiet alley, a voice called out, sharp, familiar. Carter. Elias froze. A tall man stood at the alley's entrance, wearing a dark jacket with a human military insignia. His face was rough, scared. Commander Rains. Zira immediately reached for her weapon, but Elias held up a hand, stopping her. Rains stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Didn't expect to see you here. Elias forced a casual smile. Didn't expect to be here. Rains' gaze flickered to Zira. And yet, here you are, with her. Elias tensed. He knew what this meant. Rains had orders. Walk away, Elias said quietly. Rains didn't move. You know I can't. Zira's fingers twitched near her weapon. We don't want to fight. Rains exhaled. Neither do I. But the moment command finds out you're alive, they'll send more than just me. Elias clenched his jaw. Then we disappear. Rains shook his head. There's no disappearing, Carter. Not for you. Not for her. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension was thick. Then, Rains sighed. I'm supposed to bring you in, but I won't. Elias blinked. What? Rains lowered his voice. They think you're dead. Let them keep thinking that. Zira's eyes narrowed. Why would you help us? Rains hesitated. Because I knew you, Carter, before all this. And I know you wouldn't do this without a reason. Elias met his gaze. I had a reason. Rains nodded. Then take my advice. Get off this planet. Fast. Elias exhaled. Thanks. Rains turned to leave but paused. One last thing. Elias frowned. Yeah. Rains gave him a hard look. If we meet again, I won't be able to do this. Elias nodded. I know. Then Rains was gone. No more running. Elias and Zira moved quickly, slipping through the city streets. They needed another ship, another plan. As they reached a quiet rooftop, Zyra turned to Elias. You trust him. Elias sighed. I don't know, but we don't have a choice. She studied him. We can't keep running forever. Elias met her gaze. Then we stop running. Zyra frowned. And do what? He took a deep breath. We fight. For the first time, Zyra saw something new in his eyes. Not just survival, but determination. Maybe this wasn't just about escaping anymore. Maybe it was time to face what they had started. Security forces were already swarming the docking bay. Shots were fired, but the freighter's shields held. Zira strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat. "I hope you know how to fly this thing." Elias smirked. "I learned from the best." With a final push of the throttle, the ship launched into space, escaping the station's grasp. They had made it. For now, a future unknown. As the ship stabilized, Elias exhaled, his heart still racing. Zyra leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. They were free, but they were also fugitives, hunted by both sides. Elias looked at her. "Where do we go now?" Zyra hesitated. "There's a colony on the outer rim. It's independent. We can lay low there." Elias nodded. "Then that's where we go." She studied him for a moment, something unreadable in her eyes. "You really did throw everything away for me, didn't you?" Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I threw everything away for us." For the first time in a long time, Zyra smiled. They didn't know what the future held, but at least for now, they had each other. And that was enough. The quiet rooftop gave Elias and Zyra a clear view of the city below. The colony was supposed to be a place where they could disappear, but now it felt like a trap. If Commander Rains had found them, others would too. Elias exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We can't stay here." Zyra leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Where do we go? We don't have a ship anymore." Elias frowned. That was the real problem. Without a ship, they were stranded. And if the auxiliary or human forces showed up, there would be no escape. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zyra pushed off the wall, her violet eyes sharp with determination. "There's a way." Elias raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Zyra hesitated, then said, "There's someone on this planet. Someone who can get us a ship." Elias crossed his arms. "Who?" She looked away. "My old contact. Before I was a soldier, before the war, I worked in the underground. Smugglers, information brokers, people who don't ask questions." Elias smirked. "Why am I not surprised?" She ignored his comment. "There's a man named Pharaoh. He runs things here. If we can convince him to help us, we'll have a way off this rock." Elias exhaled. "And what does Pharaoh want in return?" Zyra hesitated. "Favors." Elias shook his head. "That sounds like a bad idea." Zyra met his gaze. "Do we have a better one?" He sighed. "No. Let's go." Into the shadows. The two of them moved quickly through the dark alleys, avoiding the crowded streets. Zyra led the way, her posture tense but confident. Elias followed, his senses alert for any sign of trouble. The city was alive with voices, distant music, and the hum of machinery, a place full of secrets, just like the people in it. After what felt like an hour, Zyra stopped in front of an old building with metal doors covered in strange symbols. She knocked twice, then once more. A small screen flickered to life beside the door. A robotic voice spoke. Name and business. Zyra leaned in. "Tell Vero that Zyra Vane is here. He'll know why." There was a pause. Then, with a heavy click, the doors unlocked. Elias exchanged a glance with Zyra. That was easy. She smirked. Vero always likes surprises. They stepped inside. The smuggler's deal. The room was dimly lit, filled with the scent of spice and burning incense. People sat at tables, exchanging goods and whispers. At the center of it all, a tall man in a long coat leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of dark liquid. Vero. He looked up as Zyra approached, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, well, the lost Silari returns." Zyra crossed her arms. "We need a ship." Vero chuckled. "Straight to business." "No, how have you been, Vero?" "No, I missed you, Vero." Elias stepped forward. She said, "We need a ship." Vero's eyes flicked to Elias, his grin widening. "Ah, the human." He leaned back. You're the one she ran away with. Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to. Vero exhaled. A ship isn't cheap. And right now, your names are worth more than credits. Zira's eyes narrowed. Meaning? Vero tapped his fingers on the table. Meaning, both the Xilari and the humans want you. Badly. I could sell you and make a fortune. Elias' muscles tensed. But you won't. Vero smirked. Why not? Zira leaned forward. Because you don't trust the Xilari, and you don't trust the humans. But you do trust me. Vero studied her. That was a long time ago. Zira. She held his gaze. I still keep my word. Vero was silent for a moment. Then, finally, he sighed. All right. I have a ship. You can take it. Elias raised an eyebrow. Just like that. Vero grinned. Not exactly. You do something for me, and I'll do something for you. Elias sighed. Of course. Zira crossed her arms. What do you want? Vero leaned forward, his grin fading. There's a package in the Central District, a high-security vault. I need it. Elias frowned. And you want us to steal it? Vero spread his hands. Think of it as a trade. You get me what I want. I get you what you want. Simple. Zira glanced at Elias. He exhaled, rubbing his forehead, breaking into a high-security vault. This was getting worse by the minute. But what choice did they have? Elias looked at Vero. Fine. We'll get your package. Vero grinned. Now that's the spirit. A risky mission. As they left the smuggler's den, Elias turned to Zira. This is insane. She smirked, getting cold feet. He sighed. No, just wondering how I went from soldier to fugitive to thief. Zira gave him a teasing look. You fell in love with the wrong woman. Elias chuckled. Yeah, I did. For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of their choices heavy on their shoulders. Then Zira took a deep breath. We need to plan. We only get one shot at this. Elias nodded. Then let's make it count. They turned toward the city lights, ready for their next move. Because if they failed, they wouldn't just lose a ship. They'd lose everything. The neon lights of the Central District flickered above Elias and Zira as they crouched behind a stack of cargo crates. The high-security vault stood in front of them, tall, imposing, and guarded by armed sentries. Zira glanced at Elias. You ready for this? Elias exhaled, gripping his weapon tightly. Not really, but let's do it anyway. She smirked. That's the spirit. They had one chance. If they failed, they wouldn't get the ship Vero promised. And worse, they wouldn't get out of this city alive. Breaking in. Zira pulled out a small device from her belt. This will disable the outer security grid for exactly 20 seconds. That's all the time we have to get inside before the backup systems kick in. Elias nodded. Then we better move fast. She activated the device, and the vault's security lights flickered. Go. They sprinted across the open courtyard, sticking to the shadows. The guards were still there, but the automated sensors were down. They slipped past unseen. At the entrance, Zira worked quickly, her fingers flying over the control panel. Hurry, Elias whispered, keeping watch. A soft beep sounded, and the door slid open. They were in the vault. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. Rows of secured containers lined the walls, each marked with alien symbols. Zira pulled up Vero's instructions on her datapad. It's in the third row, last compartment, she whispered. Elias moved ahead, scanning the numbers. There, he reached for the locked compartment, but the moment his fingers touched it, a loud alarm blared through the building. Zira cursed. The security grid rebooted faster than expected. Elias grabbed the package, a small metal case, and shoved it into his bag. No time to think about that. We need to get out. Boots pounded against the floor as guards stormed inside. Their escape route was already blocked. A desperate escape. Zyra pulled out a smoke grenade and tossed it toward the guards. A thick, gray cloud filled the air. "Back exit," she shouted, pulling Elias toward another hallway. They ran through the corridors, alarms screaming around them. Security droids activated, their red eyes glowing as they gave chase. Elias fired at one, hitting its core. The droid sparked and collapsed, but more were coming. "We're not going to make it," Elias yelled. Zyra spotted an open ventilation shaft above them. There. Elias boosted her up first, then she reached down and pulled him after her. They crawled through the tight space as the sounds of guards and droids echoed below. At the end of the shaft, Zyra kicked open the vent cover. They dropped down onto the street outside. No time to celebrate. More guards were coming. Elias grabbed her hand. "Run." The final showdown. They sprinted through the city streets, weaving through alleys and marketplaces. The spaceport was close. If they could get there, Vero's ship would be waiting. Blaster fire whizzed past them. The guards were gaining ground. Elias gritted his teeth. "We're not going to make it unless we slow them down." Zyra turned to him, determination in her eyes. "Then we fight." She pulled out her weapon, and together they turned to face their pursuers. The first wave of guards rushed toward them. Elias fired. Zyra struck fast. One by one, their enemies fell, but more kept coming. Zyra's breath was heavy. "There's too many." Elias looked toward the spaceport. Almost there. Then, a familiar voice. "Get down." A sudden explosion rocked the street as a small shuttle swooped in from above, firing at the guards. "Vero." The ship's hatch opened, and Vero called out, "Move it, lovebirds." Elias and Zyra sprinted toward the shuttle. Zyra jumped in first. Elias followed, but as he reached the edge, a guard fired. The shot hit Elias in the side. He stumbled. Zyra's eyes widened. "Elias." She grabbed him, pulling him inside as the shuttle lifted off. The city shrank below them as they soared into the sky. They had made it, but Elias wasn't moving. A sacrifice worth making. Zyra pressed against Elias' wound, her hands shaking. "Stay with me." He managed a weak smile. "I'm not going anywhere." Vero glanced back from the pilot's seat. "You better not die in my ship, Carter." Zyra's eyes burned. "We need a medic." Vero sighed. "I know a place." The ship shot into hyperspace, leaving the colony and their enemies behind. Zyra held Elias' hand tightly. They had risked everything to be together. Now she wouldn't let him go, no matter what.